Hey, and welcome to another episode of The Caption Life, a podcast about how comics and pop culture impact life and society and vice versa. Coming to you from deep in the heart of Texas, I'm Kevin.
And from Indianapolis, I am Sean. And before we get started with this episode, please hit that subscribe button on whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on. And follow us on social media under the name @CaptionLife on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Reddit. And you can also find out more information about us in our past episodes at thecaptionlife.com.
Hey, if you've ever listened to the podcast before, you know that Sean and I are both... we both work in education. It's a big part of who we are. I would say that we're both lifelong learners. Mm-hmm. And I didn't dare even say we got a yearning for learning. I like to rhyme.
That's so bad.
I know, right?
That's terrible.
Well, I mean, listen, I'm not a fighter pilot like Tom Cruise in Top Gun. I don't have a need for speed. Okay.
Is this all this episode going to be now? Is just bad puns and quotes?
No, they're not puns. They're rhymes. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And we like to take a very academic approach to our comic book and geekdom knowledge. But we have a very special guest with us today who takes that idea to a next level. We get to talk to Dr. Matthew J. Smith, who's the Dean of the College of Humanities and Behavioral Sciences and a professor of communications at Radford University in Virginia. He holds a Ph.D. in communication from Ohio University and has published 11 different books, including The Secret Origins of Comic Studies with Randy Duncan and The Power of Comics, History, Form, and Culture with Randy Duncan and Paul Levitz. And he is the past president of the Comic Studies Society, the co-editor of the Routledge Advances in Comic Series, and the co-curator of Marvel Universe of Superheroes, a traveling museum exhibit that has hosted more than 900 visitors in its 4-year run. Welcome to the show, Dr. Smith.
Thank you, fellas. It's so good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show.
I want to say that I just, one of these days, I would like to have a bio that is as impressive as that, right? So that when I'm a guest on somebody's show, that my accolades are strong like that, because it's very impressive. Kudos to you.
When you got to the end, I decided I needed a nap.
Sorry,
man, I'm working too hard.
I think I know the feeling.
Hey, so Matt, we like to ask this question of all of our guests that come on the show, since we're all fans and influenced by comics. And we want to ask you, what got you into comics as a fan?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think there were 3 sort of convergent events in my life that brought me to comics. One was the Batman 66 TV series was in syndication when I was a child, and I was watching that. The Super Friends were on Saturday morning. And my parents happened to take me to a discount department store one day and found a stack of old comics. Instead of paying 25 cents a piece, you could get 5 for 25 cents. And they said, pick out 5. And I picked out 5 comic books. I can't tell you what all 5 of them were. One was an issue of the Justice League of America that has the Justice League fighting Despero on a giant space hand. I don't know what's going on there, but it was an amazing cover, and it just sort of sat with me, and I wanted to read more of these stories that were behind both Batman 66 and the Super Friends. And so right from the start, I was hooked. I wanted to know more, and I remember very distinctly, you know, I pestered my older sister to read the comic books to me, and she got increasingly annoyed with me. That's understandable. She was a teenager. She didn't need a little brother constantly in her face asking her to read comic books. And so, you know, I had to learn to read, not out of desire or because I was told to, but out of necessity. I needed to know what these stories were saying. And so comics have been a big influence in my life from the get-go. And, you know, since that early experience, kind of tying education and comics together has just followed me throughout my life.
Nice.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm glad you said that about having to learn to read comics, because I'm not a literacy coach or an English teacher or anything. I teach multimedia, but I am a literacy advocate, and I feel like learning to read and reading often as much as possible into your adulthood is an important part of being a lifelong learner. And it disheartens me that there are people out there that don't feel like reading comics is reading. And so anytime that we can get a professional on our show to say, yeah, heck yeah, it's reading, let's do this, I'm very excited.
Absolutely. I think comics are a wonderful gateway to the world of literature. So, I went on and got a bachelor's degree in English and later a doctorate in communication. But I was always motivated by wanting to explore the next thing. Comics opened that world for me. I think the only difference between myself and a lot of other comics readers is I never stopped reading comics. Right. I think some people come to an age where they're sort of like, I'm more interested in the young adult fiction, or I'm moving on to something else. I want to become a film person. And, I became all of those things. I was interested in all of that stuff, but I never left the comics behind. I was still fascinated with the way you could tell stories in this medium. And so for the span of my life, I've been a reader and a fan and wanted to know more about it and know more about how it works and how it influences people. And now I've taken those lessons, into the classroom as well.
Very awesome. Very awesome.
Yeah, it's great.
So one of the many reasons that we were excited to have you on the show is because of your background and your journey. Many of our guests that we've invited are tied directly to the comics industry, either because they're currently writing or drawing comics for a publisher, or they've created their own. But you are actually not involved in this industry, but you've been influenced by it, and it's still a part of who you are. For example, you helped curate the traveling exhibit called Marvel Universe of Superheroes. Can you tell us what that is and what made you decide to do this, and why it's important for anyone and not just comic book fans to go see it?
Yeah, so Marvel Universe of Superheroes is an absolutely amazing experience. If any of your listeners have the ability to see it, I would strongly encourage them to go to it. It is done in collaboration with Marvel Studios. And with fans around the country. We have a lot of original art and artifacts from the comics that you can only see here, as they say, on the marquee. The whole idea actually came from a German a company called Semmel Entertainment. And they were in negotiation with Disney to create an exhibit using, in some ways, the properties from Marvel Studios. And I happened to, it's kind of an interesting story if you want to hear it. I wrote a letter to the editor of Entertainment Weekly complaining about something they had done. They had run a story about the contribution of a new book from Jill Lepore, who's a scholar at Harvard, and had done artwork from the original Wonder Woman artist, H.G. Peter, as a part of that display. Lepore had written a book about William Moulton Marston, the creator of Wonder Woman, but they hadn't given H.G. Peter his credit in their article. So I wrote to them and I said, you've done an injustice to H.G. Peter. You haven't given him credit where it's due. And so they reached back to me and they said, we want to run your letter to the editor in our next edition. I'm like, well, sure, go ahead. So they ran a new picture, new piece of artwork from H.G. Peter, my letter, and I felt like I'd done my good deed for the day. H.G. Peter has been vindicated and duly credited in the pages of Entertainment Weekly. It's interesting to know that people all over the world are reading Entertainment Weekly, including a gentleman named Christoph Scholz. And Christoph works for Semmel Entertainment and is in charge of their museum exhibitions. And he was looking for what he called a scientific expert. Now, I don't know that comics are a science. I'm pretty sure they're an art, but I'm not sure they're a science yet. But he did a lot of exhibits tapping into the expertise of archaeologists and others in more scientific areas of academia. And so he reached out to me and said, I need a comics expert to help me with this exhibit. And I was lucky enough to be his first point of contact. And then he gave me the opportunity to kind of pull together a team of curators that have worked on this, including my good friend Randy Duncan. We reached out to Danny Fingeroth, who you might recall was one of the architects of Spider-Man throughout the 90s. He reached out to Annie Nocenti, who you might know was writer of Daredevil, creator of Blackheart and Typhoid Mary. She came on board. We were later joined by an amazing scholar named Ed Saunders and his assistant, Andrea Gilroy. And we just put together this team that had a vision for what this should be. And I would say one thing that your audience in particular will find interesting, we were given free reign to do what we wanted to do in terms of bringing in Marvel Studios material, but we absolutely wanted to make sure that the comics creators got their due.
Mm-hmm.
And so the great thing about the approach to the exhibit is if you come in having loved the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you are going to find amazing things there that you've seen in the films right before your eyes in the exhibit. But you're also going to learn about who created that character. And you're going to get a sense of what Jack Kirby's drawing board was like and what Stan Lee's typewriter was like. And you're going to understand there's this guy named Dick Ayers in the early Marvel universe. And there are people like Annie Nocenti who are contributing to its development, and Art Adams and Chris Claremont. And I could go on name dropping all night, right? But we wanted to make sure that the casual Marvel Cinematic Universe consumer came in knowing they loved what they saw on the silver screen, but having left knowing a lot more about the comics medium and the creators behind those comics.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really noble cause, to make sure that people understand like the creative or the creatives behind these things, because as these characters get passed down from writer to writer, artist to artist, it's usually up to that person to inject their version of the character into the mainstream, into our consciousness. And so what we know as Batman, it was one particular person's version, or the version of Batman or whatever comic book character that we know and love. But like you mentioned, with the artist who was the first to draw Wonder Woman, people like Bill Finger were forgotten about. Mm-hmm. And I think that there is as popular as these movies are now, there are a lot of creators from the early 70s through the early 90s that contributed characters that are popular on screen now, and they don't see credit, or they don't see recognition. I remember Sean and I talked about Alex Ross's version of Wonder Woman that they used in Wonder Woman 84, mm-hmm. And how disappointed I was that they didn't acknowledge that more. Right. I think there's a lot to be said for that, and I think it's good that that people can go and find this stuff.
Which is, it's interesting that you brought that up, Kevin, because I think I haven't confirmed this look through it, but I think in Shang-Chi they've actually attributed a lot to the writers and creators and everything. Because I remember I've seen a lot of people on Twitter who are in the comics industry, like, being tagged and posts and saying that, hey, look whose name I saw come up and everything. But I agree. Like, it's good to see more of that recognition in there. And I like what you said, Matt, about how, this is not just for the people who grew up like loving comics and are really into the medium, but this is really for anyone who is, a fan of Marvel, no matter, how they got involved with their own, fandom or anything, is, whether it's through the comics or it's through the MCU, or if they just, enjoy one particular character, really, that it's for everybody. And I think that's what's really cool about this exhibit. So, you've also co-wrote a book called The Power of Comics, which is what I think you described as like the first comic studies textbook. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey? What made you decide like to write one, and how it's used now?
Yeah, absolutely. So The Power of Comics, History, Form, and Culture. The title tells you exactly what's in the book: the history, the form of comics, and the culture that surrounds it. I was, as I said, I got my doctorate in communication. So I was used to seeing lots of textbooks that talk about television or film or other media that really, sort of chart how these media operate, how they generate content, who works in those industries. It sort of gives you a sense as a student for what that medium is like as a potential career field, as a place of study, as a point of departure for potential careers. And it struck me there was really no textbook for comic studies. And I think having a textbook is one step closer to legitimizing a field of study. You've got to have a way to talk about what are the core principles, what do we study, what do we understand, what's the history, how does it work, what's around it. And so I had this idea that I was going to write this textbook, And I went to my very first San Diego Comic-Con to do a presentation at the Comic Arts Conference, which is an academic slice of the larger San Diego event. And I met a gentleman there named Randy Duncan, who was a professor at Henderson State University down in Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
And we got to chatting with one another. And he said, well, I've written a textbook. And I said, oh, you have? I haven't read it yet. And he's like, well, I wrote it. I haven't published it. So we sat
very
down.
Different. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, well, good job. You wrote it, but like, where's the book? So we sat down, we compared notes. And, the great thing was about 80% of what he wrote and what I envisioned overlapped.
Mm-hmm.
And so we negotiated a way to work forward together. And that's 16 years ago. And we're still writing books together today.
That's
so,
awesome.
Delighted you two have your partnership. I know what it's like to have a good partner in the comics area. And Randy and I have been very prolific, in part because we drive one another forward. We have a Tuesday morning phone call that we regularly keep. And, you've got to get something done when you're talking to that guy. And we're now moving the textbook into its third edition. It's been successful enough that the publisher continues to want to see it revised and brought up to speed for a new generation. So we're delighted to that. The second edition, we brought on Paul Levitz. Paul, as you know, was the president and publisher of DC Comics, behind things like Watchmen and Dark Knight and lots of great stuff.
Yeah, like a major shift in like the tone of comics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
like under his
Paul's
watch at DC.
Incredible creator, incredible guy, and he's retired now from DC. He started teaching comics courses himself in the greater New York area, and we both had a chance to meet Paul in the course of our careers. And we just asked Paul, like, "Hey, you want to come along and write it with us?" And Paul, being very gracious, agreed to play along, and just terrific guy to work with. He's only strengthened the quality of the volumes going forward because he knows the industry, right? I mean, he's literally the insider, and it really helps us to sort of flesh out parts of the book that as fans we kind of speculate or we read about, but he was eyewitness to history. And it's really helped us, I think, to bring another layer of authenticity to what we're doing in the book itself.
Right. That's awesome.
You also just finished your term as president of the Comic Study Society. Can you tell our listeners what exactly that is and why your work is important?
Yeah, so the Comic Study Society is just an amazing collection of scholars from various disciplines who love comics as much as we do. And they are all over the place. They are English professors, they are art historians, they are communication professors like myself. They're from fields like sociology and psychology. They're all over the map in terms of higher education. But they all want to talk about the medium. And so many of them have begun to do research on their own and found us. Others are just coming up through the ranks, preparing to be professors, and have connected with us and are looking at us as helpmates and getting them in their careers and getting them started. And I think the great thing about the society is it gives people an intellectual home, which is one of the things we talked about when we were going about the business of forming the society. Is many of your listeners are probably familiar with the American Medical Association and maybe a few even the American Psychological Association. We know professionals like to get together and exchange ideas and establish standards for their profession and their field. And this gives all of those comic scholars out there the ability to do the same, right? To build those networks, to have confidants and cohort to work with. So we've got about 300 active members in the society right now. We know there are lots more people out there, both across America and around the world, who are doing this kind of work. Comic studies are huge in Europe, but they're also in Latin America, they're in South America. There are some in Russia. I think they're active on every continent except perhaps Antarctica at the moment, and maybe one or two is hiding out down there that we're not aware of yet. But
Mr. Freeze, I don't.
Yeah,
Penguin.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Our mission is really, it's to reach out to any of those scholars out there and students who are interested in comics and giving them an intellectual home where they can begin to have conversations and seek support for their investigation of comics as well.
That's awesome. I actually work in academia, and I'm not a professor or anything, but like this would definitely be something I would sign up for. If I
Right.
was
I
in
wish I
that.
could take your course today.
Right. Yeah.
I want to get a master's in superhero studies now.
Right.
Like
I
I don't know that I knew what I wanted to do with my life until tonight, and you've unlocked so many doors for me.
Kevin, I don't think there's a single one of us teaching comics that didn't want to have that course when we were a student,
Right.
right? So
Right.
we are living out our life's dream
Yep.
because we get to teach these courses to students who may be interested or may not. And I get excited sometimes when students just wander into my class. They've not read a comic. They may know the movies, but I have this wonderful opportunity to connect them to comics and show them the medium and how it communicates, how it translates the human experience, and get them as excited about comics as we are.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I really love that outlook on it, because like I only teach one class now, and I share a classroom with another teacher who shares my interest, but we have a lot of like Marvel and DC stuff up on the walls. My office at school is nothing but like Superman stuff, because my last name Stahlecker means steel corner in German. So like the Man of Steel has always been my thing. Go listen to episode number 41, Origin Stories, if anybody's interested. You want to catch all of that. But I don't get the opportunity to interact with kids as much in my position that I have now as I used to, where I taught 6 classes and I had 140 students a semester, and I could really connect with these kids because they could see my t-shirts and they saw the stuff on my walls and they identified with it, even though that's not what we were talking about. Like it opened a door. And so last year when we opened a new building and I changed positions, I started a club called FACE. And FACE was something that like just popped into my head because I needed an acronym, right? But it stands for the Federation of Anime and Comics Enthusiasts. Because I'm not an anime person, but I know a lot of my kids are, and I know that they needed a place too. So no, I'm super excited about having, like, we're having regular meetings now. Actually, our next meeting is on Friday, and we're having what we call superhero show and tell, which everybody brings like some sort of memorabilia that they're proud of or that they think is cool, and get to take the microphone and tell everybody else about it. In a few weeks, we're having a superhero spelling bee on campus. And then we got that idea from going to Comic-Con over the summer. PopCon, Sean and I. Yeah. And then one of the great things that's a big part of both of these worlds is cosplay. And so we're hosting a cosplay contest on the Friday before Halloween, because it's kids at my school get to dress up on those days. So like I have this great opportunity to do this, and somebody made me sit down at the end of last week and like write down all of the things that I do on campus so they could help me figure out what was my priority. And they were like, "What's FACE?" And I was like, "It doesn't matter what it is. It didn't go in anywhere because I'm not doing that. It's too important to me." And so once I explained it, they're like, "Oh yeah, no, we definitely need that." So
right.
I'm
awesome.
glad that there are people like you out there empowering other people to take a love and an interest of these things and build that passion into other people, even academically.
Kevin, I appreciate what you're doing too for your school. I think what both our stories sort of have in common is this notion of seeking community, right? Because I think comics can be an isolating experience, at least growing up in the 70s, it certainly was an isolating experience. It wasn't until middle school that I really found a friend who shared my interests. And beyond that, I didn't really meet many people until after college who had that same interest. And so, to create a space where students feel like they are welcomed when they're invited in, and they can relate to others who share their passion, who share their interest, that is so important. And I think I'm doing it on a kind of the grown-up level with the Comic Studies Society now.
One of the very first episodes. One of the very first episodes we did of this podcast was on the trope of finding family, and we talked about how that happens in comics, like the X-Men, these outcasts that are joined together for a common cause, but that it also happens through comics, like with different fandoms and things like that, right. And the way that Sean and I connected, because we didn't know each other personally, we met over Twitter, and then built what we have now because of our shared love of this stuff. I think that it might be what saves the world in the long run, because like we lose the connection to other people, we've lost any reason to continue to make our world better.
Right. Definitely.
Agreed.
Yeah. So, Matt, clearly comics has impacted you personally. Why don't you share with us why you would say it's important in our society? And, if you could share like what kind of impact has had either, I know you shared a lot of personal stories of how comics impacted you, but if you have any examples of how comics has impacted, communities, on the large, similar to what you were talking about with the Comic Studies Society, if there's any other examples that you want to share with us, we'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, Sean, I think the great thing about comics is they're the egalitarian medium, right? All you need is a pencil and a piece of paper, and you can make comics.
Right.
If I want to make film, I guess it's a little easier now that I have an iPhone. But up until this point in history, that was a little prohibitive, right? You had to own the means of production. You had to have the printing press, or you had to have the TV studio, or you had to have the radio tower. Very few people could express themselves to the masses beyond who they could reach with the sound of their voice.
Right.
Comics is egalitarian, right? You can take a message, and if you have access to a Xerox, you can get that word out far and wide. So Randy and I just did a little study looking at a phenomenon in India, of all places, where there's an organization called World Comics India, and the effort there is to create grassroots comics. And the notion is that you go into a community, you train people how to do very simple 4-panel comics that advocate for some cause that they believe in. Maybe your local official's corrupt and you want to get him out of office, or maybe your water supply is not good and you want to lobby for that to be improved.
Right.
And you take these comics and you post them in the town square, and people can read about your perception of what's going on that needs to be addressed, that needs to be changed.
Right.
And because they're comics, they're inviting, right? I could write my 9 to 5 theses and post them to the church door, or a 4-panel comic, which is really easy to understand, really accessible to most people, and gets the idea across really quickly. So, comics have this ability, this power to reach audiences that I think is just phenomenal. And we all kind of like the entertaining comics, and I do too. Most of the comic books you see behind me are they're entertaining, but there's a lot of potential there to teach, and there's a lot of potential to change and persuade. And I think because comics can do that, as well as, if not in some cases even better than other media, it's worth studying them. It's worth putting them forward. It's worth encouraging people to experiment with them.
Right. Yeah, and I find it. As you were explaining that, I found it interesting, because I remember thinking that there's examples of that in comics currently, and not just currently, but also in the past as well too. So I remember, when we were having, public discussions about immigration and immigrants and everything. I remember a comic similar to what you explained. It was, not a huge comic book. I think it may have just been like one page, but it was about, 4 to 6 panels of Superman talking about, how Americans are made up of people from all over the world and not just, a specific subset. And that was just, I think it was just like 4 or 5 panels, and they did the same thing about teachers and how, they held teachers up as being heroes just like them and everything. And so I think you're spot on with that, is that, that actually sends a message really quick. And if you think about it, you can even apply that to, some of the political cartoons, or, just really famous images that we have around, like Rosie the Riveter and Uncle Sam, how those are, they're not comics per se, but the medium is still the same, that there's an image, there's a little bit of text on it, and it sends a powerful message either way. And comics, has that impact, just like what you said. So I really like that.
There's a great historical example of a book called Martin Luther King and the Montgomery Story. And it was produced in the 60s to help propagate Dr. King's ideas about peaceful, nonviolent resistance. And the book has stayed in print since the 60s. And was actually adopted and disseminated among people during the Arab Spring, when there were revolts going on in the Mideast. And they translated this book into Farsi and they distributed it to people because they wanted to teach them how to actively resist, government oppression, but not to do so in a violent way.
Right.
So, the potential of comics is just limitless. And I think that's what I find so fascinating about it. We can tell really entertaining stories like The Dark Knight Returns or Watchmen, but it can also have these subtle ways in which it shifts the world and makes people think about the world in which they live.
Yeah.
And the power of 4 panels, like to a child, like as somebody who grew up reading like the Sunday comics at the back of the paper. I mean, I loved, and I would consume whole volumes of Garfield and Calvin and Hobbes and Beetle Bailey. Beetle Bailey is one of my all-time favorites. Like I had gotten to the point where like when I was 10 or 12 years old, I could draw Beetle Bailey like really, really well. But it's so powerful. Like that little sampling that you can get once a week or whatever in 4 panels is enough to ignite the imagination. Dr. Smith, before we jump into this game, because we're going to play a game with you.
Okay.
I got to ask you a few like comic questions. Like, do you have like a favorite superhero?
Oh man, I dreaded that question.
You don't have to answer it. You can plead the fifth. This is a free country.
Since I'm under contract with Marvel, I got to say a Marvel character, right? I mean,
okay. You could give me your Mount Rushmore. You could tell us whatever.
Yeah.
I think like many fans as they mature, it's often less about the characters and more about the creators. So
that was my next question.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Jeff Johns.
Okay.
I think he kind of captures. He understands that there's a legacy and a history, and he really respects that and translates it into exciting ways. So I think often it's whatever Jeff Johns is writing this month is my favorite comic book superhero. But Kevin, like you, I mean, I Superman was one of the earliest comics that I was exposed to, and I think when Byrne did the reboot in '86, somehow I just imprinted on that, just seared itself into my consciousness, rewrote the synapses, and Byrne's Superman is for me just kind of like what I aspire to be, right? The kind of guy who just uses whatever gifts he has for the benefit of those around him. So often I'll say that Superman is one of those, but if you mention this to the folks at Marvel, it's Spider-Man. It's Spider-Man, really. Yeah,
do you have a favorite type of comic that's not superhero? Like a favorite genre that's not superhero?
Memoir comics are so prolific right now, and I'm going back. I'm a little behind in my reading, but I'm trying to finish up March, and I really am, just sort of intrigued by people who find a way to tell their story in words and pictures. I think that's a real interesting way to sort of get out. What happened to me? How did it happen to me? What do I recall of it happening? And memoir comics are really exciting to read because there are real people behind those stories, and that's kind of neat to conceive of.
Can I share a story about that since you brought that up? So at the time of the recording, so today is September 15th. It's not going to be released until October 1st, but we just had September 11th, and I know. I was a junior in high school when that happened, right? My son, who is in 2nd grade, has asked me about September 11th and asked, what happened, because they've been talking about at school. They done a whole day of just kind of talking about like what happened, and everything. So he kind of had the idea of what that is, but he, was asking mommy and daddy more about like what it was, and he asked, were we there? And so we explained, no, we were, here, but we watched it on TV and everything, and one thing that he had asked is that he wanted to know if there were like videos of what happened. And, being 2nd grade, I'm like, you're not really ready to watch that. Cause it's like, I told him I was 10 years older than you at the time it happened. It was traumatic for me. But what I did was I told him, I was like, what if we got a comic book to maybe share? And there's a really popular one that I didn't hear about until a couple of years ago. And I heard it from someone on Twitter named Tim Smythe, who shared the Spider-Man Marvel comic issue number 36 that was about September 11th. And he and I sat down and opened up Marvel Unlimited, and I kind of went through, page by page with him, kind of explain what was going on. And I could tell from him, like looking through it, he was just like, so astonished about what happened, and he would ask questions about it. And I felt like that was actually a great way to kind of have a discussion with him about it without having to show actually what happened, because again, being that young, he's just not ready for it. But that was a nice, safe way to do it. And I think, any other medium probably wouldn't have as much of an impact as on him as much as this one did, And so I think you're right on in that, that's going to be a popular thing to do because it is very powerful that way, and that it captures a lot in a short amount of pages that is just as powerful a message as, reading anything else as well too.
Yeah, absolutely. Picture's worth 1,000 words.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
And now we have to transition into playing a really goofy game.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. I
Looking
would
for
just
the
say like how
segue.
powerful that experience was, though. I mean, it's just, because as a parent, when you have those difficult conversations, it's just really nice to have a medium that, can make that happen,
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So comics is great.
One of the things I think is really great about comics is, you can control the pacing of it.
Yes.
Film, there's the tyranny of the director. The director tells you how long you can look at something, moves you along. Comics is more collaborative than a lot of other media, because once the creator puts out the product, it's beyond his or her control, right? And so you as the reader can make it go as quickly or as slowly as you want.
Right.
And there's time to dwell on things. And I'm sure with your son, you had the opportunity to ask questions and talk to each other about panels. It's not like you had to sit through the whole thing, before you could actually have a conversation. And I love that about comics.
Right.
And Sean, I'm just giving you a hard time.
I know.
The purpose of this show is for us to tie the reality that we live in to the make-believe universes that we know and love. And it was an interesting time in our country's history, and those two things came together, because there were a lot of instances like around that time where people had a hard time like understanding how they were going to go back to like what they were doing before. Like it was such a life-changing event, that it was a way that a lot of people there were writers and artists at Marvel who worked in Manhattan, and this is the way they processed it. And I think that that's great. I think that that's what they've produced will stand the test of time, and especially because it's available digitally. People like you can go back and have those conversations with our kids, with our future generations. So hey, let's segue into the fun and the shenanigans, because every time that we have a guest on the show, we like to try to play a game with them. And today we have got a little something planned called Explain a Marvel Superhero Badly. And because I'm the game master, this usually pits Sean versus whoever's our guest.
Right.
And so what I'm going to do is I scoured the interwebs, mostly just a thread in Reddit. You just one-stop shopping. Why would you go anywhere else?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But essentially, I've got a bunch of descriptions for Marvel characters, and I want to give you the description, and I'm going to give you the opportunity to guess. And this probably won't be hard, but I'm going to give you an example first. The example is not a Marvel one. I picked a DC one as the example, just so I wouldn't waste a Marvel one on the game. So this is a guy who isn't Batman, does Batman stuff, but with a mustache.
Green Arrow.
The Green Arrow, right? So Dr. Smith knows how to play. Sean, you better step up your game.
Well, for some reason, I didn't go to Green Arrow like immediately, but it makes sense now.
I didn't want to throw like the color green in there,
right? Or Archer, or like
or
things
arrows,
that were clearly characteristic of it. Yeah.
But speaking of bows and arrows, the side note, because the trailer for the Hawkeye series just came out, and the marketing material says, "What is it this holiday season? The best presents come
with a bow."
And I'm like, that is just. The comics lover, the dad in me that just loves that unnecessary pun. Yeah.
Oh no. Well, and yeah, I mean, not to get down too far a rabbit hole, but like I'm really excited about that series because I read some of the comics about Clint Barton and Kate Bishop, and as I was watching the trailer, it's like watching the comic come to life because they pulled in so much almost more than I've seen in any other trailer for any other show that they have. It's just like, I can tell you like, yes, this is straight from the comic. This is straight from the comic. Like I loved it. It was so great.
And you've become that guy.
I have, yes.
You're going to be yelling at the show. That didn't happen in the comics. All right. To the game. We're going to alternate. I'm going to give Dr. Smith the first chance to guess. And then on the second one, Sean, I'll give you. So Dr. Smith, the first one is old man who is really into metal can't decide if he's really an anarchist or not.
Old man who's really into metal. Is it Old Man Logan?
That is incorrect.
Oh.
Sean, do you have a guess?
My initial guess was Iron Man, but then the anarchist thing, I think, threw me off. I mean, it could still. I'll go with Iron Man. Yeah.
That is also incorrect.
Can I get a second guess?
Yeah.
We can circle back. Absolutely.
Yeah, let's do that.
Is it Magneto?
It is Magneto.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. Sean,
the old man threw me off because sometimes Magneto's younger and sometimes, and his age varies a lot.
That's true. And they give him gray or white hair and a lot of like comic depictions, even though they're very coy about his actual age.
Right.
Plus he's been the same age for 50 years at this point.
Oh, more than that now, right?
60 actually. Yeah. 60 coming up very soon. 60 years.
Yeah.
Okay. So Sean, follow up. It's a very similar one.
Okay.
Old man whose metal is really into him can't decide if he's a leader or not.
That's gotta be Old Man Logan.
It's Wolverine, but yes.
Yeah. I guess that's true. Yeah, Wolverine. Yeah, that makes sense too. Yeah.
I gotta say that, like, psychologically speaking, Wolverine is still one of my favorite characters.
Mm-hmm.
Just because two things. We've talked about this. He's portrayed all the time as the loner, but he holds the record for being the person who's been a part of more teams in Marvel history than anybody else. And then the second thing is he essentially can't die, right? He can't he can recover from everything, but because even though he's nearly immortal, he still is not immune to pain, which makes for a very interesting character because he's lived like a very painful and tortured life over the course of several hundred years.
Mm-hmm.
Runner up for the Wolverine description: impolite Canadian doesn't own nail clippers.
Nice.
Okay. Dr. Smith, this one goes to you. Family and friends deal with life changes after an interstellar vehicle accident.
Is that the Fantastic Four?
That is the Fantastic Four. Great job.
Yep.
Sean, to you.
Yes.
Traumatized military veteran's life is changed by spending time in the park with family.
Oh, Punisher. Frank Castle.
That one really made you laugh.
It did. It shouldn't either. It's tragic, but the choice of words.
Some of these are pretty.
Clever.
Some of these are pretty bad.
You're right.
Okay, Sean.
No, I think it's Matt this time.
It's Matt's turn. Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Smith, emotionally repressed scientist has issues with anger management and weight gain.
That is the Incredible Hulk.
Yes, that's correct. John, guy with incurable cancer eats chimichanga and talks to himself a lot.
Oh, Deadpool.
Correct.
Wade Wilson. Yep.
Okay, here we go. Spoiled. This is for Dr. Smith. Spoiled brat with carpenter's tools tries to save the world from his more interesting pansexual half brother.
Oh.
I'll read that one more time.
Yeah, that's a lot. There was a lot of information packed in there.
Spoiled brat with carpenter's tools tries to save the world from his more interesting pansexual half brother.
Oh, it's Thor.
It is Thor. Runner up for the Thor description was really dedicated Ren Fair actor with magic. I've got 3 left. So Sean, nerdy social outcast goes through body changes, only feels safe in his pajamas after uncle dies.
Spider-Man.
That's correct.
Sorry. The pajamas part kind of threw me off.
Okay. Dr. Smith, for you, 100-year-old man fights Nazis while having blonde hair and blue eyes and the perfect body.
Captain America.
Captain America.
Oh my gosh, that was a great description.
Yeah.
I love that.
Okay, so this is the last one, and I think it's the best one. So I'm just going to say it, and whoever guesses it first can be the winner of our game.
Okay.
Here we go. Ready?
Yep.
Here's the description. Who?
A Watcher.
Incorrect.
Ah.
Who?
Oh my gosh.
You're going to kick
Star-Lord.
yourself. It is Star-Lord. The legendary outlaw. You've never heard of me?
But you know what's funny though is I can't remember his name, but there's actually a character in the comic whose mutant power is he can interact with everybody, and then they forget about him the moment he is out of view from them.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so that's like a tragic story to read about, where your mutant power is no one ever remembers you.
Could you ever fall in love then?
It'd be kind of like 51st Dates, right?
51st Dates.
Yeah, because I can't remember. Yeah, I can't remember his name. I think he was talking to Kitty Pryde, if I remember correctly, like the stories reading about. But I just remember thinking, gosh, that's like a terrible mutant power to have. Almost as bad as it is. Worse than Rogues, I think. So
yeah, but it sounds like a great romantic comedy. He keeps saving the same girl over and over again.
Right.
She never remembers who he is.
Right. Yeah, I think that actually, as a film, I think it'd be really interesting to tell that story, right?
If only we had somebody with an extensive knowledge of Marvel Comics that could maybe clue us into who that character is. Is that too deep of a cut for you?
Yeah, I must have missed that one.
Okay.
I have no idea.
Well, it's okay. We've talked about people on this show before who turns out they were from the other company. So this could be that case. So don't sweat it. Don't sweat it. All right. Well, the game was short and sweet, but it was a lot of fun to play.
It was.
We will have to do a DC version of that sometime, because there were a whole lot of DC entries on the list, but I wanted to focus mostly on Marvel for Dr. Smith.
Thank you.
Dr. Smith, before we go, we want to say thank you for coming on the show. But before we go, can you give our, sorry, I'm going to do that over again, Sean, for the recording.
That's okay.
Dr. Smith, thank you for coming on to our show and for sharing with us about your journey. Can you tell our listeners where they can find you and your work online?
Yes. So if you go to powerofcomics.com, you will find the link for our text and other works that we've been doing, and we'd be glad to have you come visit us.
All right. That wraps up another episode. Oh, did you want to add something, Sean?
I think I'll add just one other thing. And the exhibit I know is wrapping up in Chicago right now, but it's supposed to show up in Columbus, Ohio here in November, right?
That is correct, Sean.
Awesome. So if you're in the Ohio or surrounding state area, go check it out.
Thank you. Yes, please do.
All right. Well, that wraps up another episode of The Caption Live. We hope you enjoyed listening. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button on whatever major podcast platform you listen to. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram @Caption Live. And if you like what we're doing, give us a shout out, tag us in your post. For more info about us and all of our previous episodes, please visit thecaptionlife.com. And until next time, Excelsior.
Oh, that's what I was going to say.
Oh, beat you to it.
Yeah, I know.